This is Broadway and Rector Street in the eyes of New Yorker Gary Pollard. The day is September 11th, 2001, a day that will go down in history as a turning point in the world. At 8:46 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, American Airlines Flight 11 impacted the North Tower. Just 17 minutes later, at 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 struck the South Tower in a coordinated strike. Within 2 hours, both the North and South Towers had collapsed. Both planes were hijacked by militants part of the Islamic terrorist group Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden. For the first time in its history, the mainland United States was under a major attack, sparking domestic and international outcry. The attacks took the lives of 2,977 victims, making them the deadliest terrorist attacks in U.S. history.
On September the 11th, enemies of freedom committed an act of war against our country.
Days after the attack, then President of the United States, George Walker Bush, responded to the attack in an address to a joint session of Congress. Despite the attacks, he continued to affirm that the State of the Union was strong. He delivered an ultimatum to the Taliban government in Afghanistan to hand over Al-Qaeda leaders and declared a global war on terrorism. Negotiations with the Taliban were carried out, but they were short-lived. Talks broke down, and days later, at the authorization of President Bush, the first United States military strikes against Afghanistan were carried out.
Good afternoon. On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against Al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
With that, Operation Enduring Freedom and the global war on terror was on. So where did this forever war, as President Biden called it, which spanned 20 years through the terms of 4 presidents, cost roughly $8 trillion and took over 900,000 lives, even come from? How did this all happen? What if Afghanistan was never the real problem? To understand where this conflict came from, we have to take a step back roughly 2 centuries to the age of European imperial expansion worldwide. Afghanistan was never fully colonized, but it was repeatedly pulled into the Great Game between Britain and Tsarist Russia during the 19th century. Britain saw Afghanistan as a critical strategic buffer protecting its control over India, the crown jewel of its empire. This led to a series of invasions later known as the Anglo-Afghan Wars. Afghanistan fiercely resisted occupation, and its mountainous terrain made it difficult for the British to assert full control. Instead, each conflict left behind weakened institutions, ruined infrastructure, and political fragmentation throughout the entire region. In 1893, Britain drew the Durrand Line Agreement, creating a border between Afghanistan and British India. This line cut directly through Pashtun tribal areas, dividing communities across what would later become the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. For Britain's imperial control, this was beneficial as it helped secure the frontier of its Indian colony. However, for the Pashtuns living there, it created long-term disputes in the region and split tribes that had previously existed long before the line was drawn. Instead of a unified state, Afghanistan was left with a patchwork of competing tribal systems without a strong central government, heavily shaped by external pressure and intermittent intervention. Ethnic separatism, devolutionary pressures, and clashes between tribes and warlords over territory rocked the entire country. This structure matters. A fragmented state with contested borders and limited central authority becomes easier for outside powers to influence and harder to stabilize from within, making the region a more fertile ground for extremist groups to take power. By the time the Cold War and later conflicts emerged by the turn of the century, Afghanistan wasn't starting from a position of strength, nor was it a pre-existing state that slowly ruptured as a result of the ensuing ideological struggle. It was carrying a long history of external and internal division during the imperial period, and it was paying the price.
Now we fast forward to 1945. After 6 years of war, the world was at peace, or so it seemed. This peace did not last long. After the fall of Berlin in 1945, Europe became divided by the Iron Curtain, caught between the ideological struggle of the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cold War was in full bloom. The Cold War was not a direct war between the two nations. Instead, it was a slow global struggle for influence, ideology, and strategic control. Fragmented countries across places like Asia, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Middle East became intense battlegrounds for proxy wars. Afghanistan sat next to Soviet-controlled Turkmenistan, directly bordering the USSR, making it strategically important for both sides. During the 60s and 70s, despite previous turmoil, Afghanistan was quite stable. Kabul was modernizing, universities were expanding, and culture was flourishing. Infrastructure was developing, with both the United States and Soviet Union funding projects to try and pull Afghanistan into its own sphere of influence. Beneath the facade of stability, however, political divisions were growing. Afghanistan's long-standing monarchy collapsed in 1973 after a coup led by Mohammad Daoud Khan. Just 5 years later, another coup brought the Communist People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan to power. The Soviets had successfully secured their border, or so it seemed. The new communist government pushed aggressive reforms involving land redistribution, secularization, and restrictions on traditional religious authority. These policies were deeply unpopular in many rural and conservative parts of Afghanistan. Resistance movements quickly formed. Islamist fighters, tribal militias, and anti-communist groups began revolting against the government. Afghanistan was ascending into chaos. In December 1979, fearing the complete collapse of the communist government in Afghanistan, the Soviet Union invaded. What followed became one of the most defining proxy wars of the Cold War. The United States saw an opportunity. The CIA, in coordination with Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, funneled billions of dollars in weapons, funding, and training to Afghan resistance fighters, the Mujahideen. To the United States, these fighters were useful allies against Soviet expansion, but many of these militant groups were heavily radicalized, fragmented, and driven by extremist ideology. Foreign volunteers also entered Afghanistan to join the conflict. Among them was a wealthy Saudi named Osama bin Laden, who soon formed a coalition to unite Arab fighters in Afghanistan. This coalition was called Al-Qaeda. The war devastated Afghanistan, with millions displaced and entire villages destroyed, but Afghanistan's troubles were just beginning. Afghanistan was left shattered. The communist government eventually fell, but peace never came. Mujahideen factions turned on each other in a brutal civil war. Warlords fought for territory, and civilians were caught in the middle. Out of that chaos emerged the Taliban, a paramilitary group promising order, religious purity, and an end to the chaos. They quickly gained traction, and soon took control of the entire country. While imperialism fractured the country and the Cold War radicalized it, in order to understand the conflict in Afghanistan, the role of religion cannot be ignored. Islam has shaped Afghan society for centuries. It influenced law, culture, education, and daily life, long before the arrival of foreign powers. For many Afghans, religion was their identity and way of life. To help us understand this complex narrative, we brought in Dr. Ilona Strikov, an expert on Islamic studies.
Islam was the air that everyone in the Islamicate world breathed. It was so much a part of daily life that even today, even in relatively secular parts of the former Islamic world, such as Turkey, you still say, I'll see you, by saying inshallah, meaning if God wills.
During the 1980 Soviet invasion, religion became tied directly to resistance. Many Afghans saw the war not only as a political struggle, but also as a defense of faith, tradition, and national identity. The concept of jihad, often misunderstood in the West, became central to the conflict.
The word jihad comes from the Arabic juhd, which means effort. And a lot of people don't know that in the Quran, there isn't one type of effort. There's actually two types of effort. The one, jihad an-nafs, the jihad or effort of perfecting the self. And the second, which in the Quran is much less important, is jihad as-sayf, the effort of battling the other, the outsider, the non-Muslim.
Foreign governments and militant networks recognized the power religion could have in mobilizing militia units. During the Cold War, billions of dollars flowed into Afghanistan, supporting Islamist resistance groups fighting the Soviets. By the late 1990s, Afghanistan had become more than a war zone. It had become a place where political collapse, foreign intervention, and extremist ideology reinforced one another. Afghanistan's forever war did not emerge from the 9/11 attacks. It did not emerge from a single moment or a single instance. Decades of imperial interference weakened the region politically. Cold War rivalry flooded the country with weapons, violence, and instability. Extremist movements then grew within the chaos left behind. When the attacks of September 11 shocked the world, the United States entered a conflict whose roots stretched back generations. 20 years after Operation Enduring Freedom first began, the war came to a close much in the same way it started. Extremist groups were still in control of a fragmented and weakened nation. In August 2021, United States Air Force C-17 Moose 88 departed Kabul. It was the last United States aircraft to ever leave Kabul, being the last in the final evacuation run. Its departure marked the end of America's longest war, but Afghanistan's war continued. Afghanistan's story never ended. Fighting continues to this day. Afghanistan was never the beginning of the story. nor was it ever the problem, and perhaps that was why it was never so easy to end it.